So, fear of intimacy. Let's talk about it. So, fear of intimacy is something I talked a lot about on my Instagram throughout the last couple of years, just in my little posts, if you will. And it's something I quite easily self-diagnosed in myself, and afterwards proceeded to very swiftly leave alone my nature of acceptance conditioning me to take it as it is and just say, like, I guess this is my life now, and continue living onwards. Intimacy itself is a powerful beast. We all crave it, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not. When we talk about longing, desire, or the thirst, what we're really talking about is intimacy. At the end of the day, I think it's just about being connected to another person, or several other people, you know what I mean? Deep down, we all want to feel that sense of connection to someone. Myself, I've never been a particularly social person. I think all throughout high school, I had a grand total of 3 friends, and that always seemed like more than enough for me. Neither have I ever been particularly tactile, which I'm not sure if that's the right translation of the word, but I've never really craved physical touch. But it wasn't until I've gone through my first heartbreak, which was bad, by the way, I spent like 6 months being Bella from Eclipse, that I began to notice that now all of my relationships were being affected by this inner anxiety that I couldn't really place or understand. What was hard for me before, connecting and trusting people, was practically impossible now. I have to note that I'm mostly going to be talking about romantic relationships, because those are the ones that, for me, were affected the most, which is not at all to undermine the importance of friendships. I often find myself holding those in higher degree, and I've truly tried my hardest to maintain friendships across continents and millions of miles, and, you know, being an international school kid and whatnot. But it is certainly true that there are numerous different kinds of intimacy. For my rather quick research for this video, I found a bunch of different websites that will tell you all the different kinds of intimate relationships and all the different lists that they had. I basically just chose one which outlines them into 4 categories that I, for the most part, agree with. So these categories would be, firstly, experiential, meaning that you share activities with, interests with. Then there's intellectual, naturally, so wherever people you connect with on an intellectual level. Thirdly, emotional, which naturally you talk about your feelings and stuff. And lastly, sexual, which I imagine needs not be explained. And honestly, diagnosing myself wasn't difficult. Trust issues, check. Inability to share feelings and discuss emotions, check. Avoiding physical contact, check. Trouble forming and committing to relationships, double check. The unfortunate underlying cause of all of this is fear, naturally. Fear of vulnerability, abandonment, engulfment, and ultimately fear of loss. To get personal again, just for a moment, see, I'm doing it again, apologizing for relating something to my personal experience, even though that's literally the point of this video. But once again, to get slightly personal. As I said, I noticed the signs after my first slightly traumatizing, and I don't use that word lightly, relationship. My fear of losing myself in a relationship definitely stems from there. But I begin to believe that the groundwork for that had been laid out years earlier. Growing up in the age of the internet was a singularly unique experience for my generation. We, unlike millennials, don't really remember a time before the internet, but unlike Gen Z, definitely remember a time before TikTok. I am neither, and I am both at the same time, maturing on the cusp of a generation. So, daddy issues? Oh no. I think it's absolutely hilarious seeing the internet discourse around daddy issues that's been changing over the last couple years. I vividly remember a time in 2015 when daddy issues was a song and an aesthetic. It was something akin to a Tumblr grunge. with the addition of neglectful parents. But over time, it morphed into something a lot more meaningful and relatable. I've seen countless posts and people talking about their relationship with their fathers and the many ways that it can mess you up. I've always had a rather tumultuous relationship with my father, which is only further colored by the fact that my brain has an inability to store memories from my childhood unless something traumatic was happening in them. I don't remember much of my father from my early childhood. Most of my memories coming to fruition only after my brother was born, and as it felt to me at the time, I was put on the back burner when it came to my father's love. Freud would have a field day with that one. Whether that is actually the case, which is honestly more likely than you'd think when it comes to the desired boy of the Russian family, or just a really weird manifestation of the Oedipus complex, is definitely better left to the interpretation of someone much smarter than me. But to me, it's evident that the fear planted its roots in my head then and there. Add the fact that my father died when I was 14 years old, and bada bing, bada boom, you have an emotionally stunted and emotionally broken young woman who is always craving for a connection she's too fearful to have. That was a lot.
Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no.
So, I haven't actually had a normal committed relationship since that first one, which is fine, by the way, totally fine. I have, however, had a number of flings and one longer relationship of 6 months with a person that I saw maybe twice a week. It was during this 6-month relationship that I began to notice all of these little toxic traits that I had, and even while becoming aware of, still couldn't control. I would suddenly become distant. I wouldn't want to share my goals and aspirations. I only saw this person as an occasional good time, and not even in the way that you just thought of, because in all the 6 months that we were dating, we practically never had sex. It was a friend which I was technically dating, but really just a friend. All of this was happening under the weighted blanket of guilt for leading them on. And so eventually I broke it off, which was the right thing to do. Now, this has all been very Doomer-esque of me thus far, and I think the time for me has come to place some solutions for the problems I put forward. No, but seriously, therapy is probably great. I say this as someone who has never gone to therapy because I've never had the means to do it. It's definitely something I'm looking into and something I very much want to try out for myself. But in the meantime, I wondered what I can do. Well, I can accept that reality is transient and that the universe is in constant flux, that my emotions and fears will come and go for as long as I live, but me, the true me, will always just be a backdrop for these experiences. One of my favorite quotes by Heraclitus is the river one. No man steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. I am no longer a child craving for love. Yet so often I fall back into those same experiences and habits and begin to once again see the world through the lens of neglect and fear. And fear is the worst part, for to fear something you desire is a special type of hell. Part 6. Nothing matters, so who cares? Life is suffering. Our parents fucked us up. I haven't been hugged in years. I miss my mom, though she's right here. I'm lonely, I want to be left alone, I never have sex anymore, living is so expensive, and everywhere you look, someone seems to be doing better than you. Every good experience is colored by the fact that it will end, and you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of all of this? What is the point, and why am I even here? And honestly, does anything I do even matter in the grand scheme of things? Because honestly, the more I learn, the less that seems to be the case. And the icebergs are melting, and the people are dying, and we put a man on the moon decades ago, and still send young boys to die in wars, and honestly, fuck All of it. I think a lot of being brave comes from an inner desire to just say fuck it and do the thing that scares you just so you finally stop thinking about it. I think a lot of personal progress comes from this mentality. It is not so much an aspiration to an ideal that motivates us, but just as a desire to not be wherever it is we are. One thing is constant. We were never meant to be solitary creatures. We are tribe folk with a craving to be heard, to be seen, appreciated, and above all, loved. Why else would we have such an endless capacity for unconditional love and acceptance? To get too spiritual or even religious on y'all, but I think there is great merit to the fact that the world can only be healed by love and compassion, and it feels like every day we stray further and further from that ideal. Being unable to give and receive intimacy and love and commitment have become the norm, and not just in the typical monogamous structure of relationships so seen today thanks to the prevailing monolithic Christian order on romance, but in all relationships. We treat commitment issues in people like they're a personality trait rather than a serious hindrance to a person's happiness, because we either idolize romantic relationships or dismiss them entirely. You can tell me that you're not looking for a relationship right now, and I'll just want to ask you why. Is it actually because you are focusing on yourself, your spiritual, personal, and professional development? Is it actually because you are spending time with yourself and forcing yourself to learn your habits, your boundaries, and all the other things that make you you, that you can then bring into relationships to foster that intimacy and connection? Or is it because the idea of starting something that actually means anything is really scary and will probably hurt? When did we become so desensitized to the human condition that we are willing to accept all of the suffering without ever tasting the fruits of its labor? My point is this: if suffering is inevitable, and we are just for a moment going to assume that it is, why spend our tiny, short, firefly lives cowering in fear of being hurt and only hurting ourselves more in the process?